Number 10. Metal Cova. Looking at all the trippy artwork covering the building, you'd never think that Metal Cova used to be a former military barracks in the Slovenian capital of Ljubljana. Built in 1911 by the Austro-Hungarian Army, the 3-acre, 1.2 hectares property consists of 7 separate barracks buildings. The military used the site until 1991, when Slovenia became independent from Yugoslavia. Soon after the army cleared out, squatters moved in and turned the buildings into their homes. Today, Melkova functions as an artistic community known for its eclectic decor, which includes psychedelic art, colorful graffiti, and punk rock visuals. The Slovenian government tried to demolish the site almost 3 decades ago in 1993, but hundreds of protesters took over the site and stopped it from happening. 2 years later, Metal Cova was designated a self-organized autonomous zone. Local and state officials have made it clear that they don't like people squatting there. They managed to get one building demolished in 1997 and another was torn down in 2006. But the squatters have refused to back down to the authorities, who have reluctantly come to tolerate their presence. Metal Cova still has no legal status, but it's legitimately connected to the city's water and power supply and became a National Cultural Heritage Site in 2005. Its future remains uncertain as leaders and urban planners are unclear about where they stand on the controversial settlement. Number 9. Pistock. Originally known as the National Gas Turbine Establishment, Pistock was a top-secret site built in Farnborough, England during the 1950s. Equipped with custom test facilities, it's quickly become the world's leading research establishment for gas turbines and jet engines. It's here that the British government tested its Navy's gas turbines and examined engines seized from the Soviet Union. The site employed around 160 people when it peaked in 1973, making it the largest test facility of its kind throughout Europe and perhaps even the world. Pistock became less necessary after the turn of the millennium as technology enabled researchers to simulate tests using computers. It slowly emptied out and was shut down in 2000 to make way for a planned housing development. The equipment was left in place, serving as an eerie time capsule of what was once upon a time one of the most important government sites in Britain. As they sat unused, the outdated buildings and equipment fell into decay and they were slated for demolition. Urban explorers began visiting the post-industrial site around 2006 at the risk of being arrested for trespassing so that they could catch a final glimpse of Pistock before it was destroyed. Due to its secretive nature, there's limited documentation about the site. Many people were sad to see it demolished. They saw Pistock as a landmark of cultural heritage and believed that its closure marked the end of British industry's golden age. But plans nevertheless moved forward and the base was destroyed. Number 8. Abundant Life Building. In downtown Tulsa, Oklahoma, there's a windowless 7-story concrete building just sitting there completely empty. Built in 1958 as the headquarters for a televangelist enterprise called the Oral Roberts Ministries, it stands in stark contrast to its name, the Abundant Life Building. Its unique exterior is covered in a facade of white marble diamonds. The structure was commissioned by a controversial preacher named Oral Roberts. He named it after a passage in the Bible that inspired his sermons, which taught that God wants to bless people with prosperity. Roberts wanted the building to have an ultra-modern and futuristic feel. With the advent of new technologies like central air and fluorescent lighting, he felt that windows were unnecessary. The walls were painted bright colors as a substitute for natural light. The Abundant Life Building housed a television studio, an auditorium, a banquet hall, and a mail processing center for the millions of dollars of donations that the ministry received. In the mid-1960s, just a handful of years after being built, Roberts relocated his headquarters elsewhere. The building changed hands several times thereafter and has been vacant since the 1980s. In 2019, workers removed the marble diamonds from the outside after they began falling off and became a safety hazard. The Abundant Life Building's future remains uncertain. There are currently no redevelopment plans and some locals are fighting to preserve it as a historic structure. Number 7. Prairie Observatory. Walnut Point State Park in Oakland, Illinois is home to a remote trail leading to an abandoned observatory. It was built during the 1960s as a place for astronomers from the University of Illinois to get a view of the dark night sky, uninterrupted by light pollution. The structure consisted of a dome measuring 40 feet, 12.2 meters in diameter, and an attached apartment for scientists to stay in. It was abandoned in 1981 after only being used for 11 years. The telescope was removed and is still used by the Champaign-Urbana Astronomical Society, but the building is still there. Today, the observatory is overgrown with nature, decaying and covered in graffiti, giving it a post-apocalyptic feel. It's a popular attraction among urban explorers seeking destinations that are off the beaten path. Going inside is strictly forbidden, but visitors are welcome to view it from the outside. The building was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1986. A few years later, it became a National Historic Landmark. Would you like to put on your urban exploring cap and check this place out? Let us know in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 6. Moxie Bottle House. Moxie is a soft drink that was developed in Maine in 1876 as an elixir to prevent paralysis, nervousness, insomnia, and softening of brain tissue. It eventually became a popular fountain beverage that people either love or hate, owing to its bittersweet taste. Have you ever tried it? In 1906, the company's promotions department built the 32-foot-tall Moxie Bottle House to use as a stand at the New England Food Fair. It traveled for several years after the fair, even making a pit stop at the famous Luna Park in Coney Island. After that, it spent a decade at the Pine Island Amusement Park in New Hampshire. The Moxie Bottle House was ultimately abandoned. In 1999, an enthusiast group dedicated to the soda called the New England Moxie Congress decided that the building needed to be rescued. They raised enough money to have it taken apart and relocated to the Matthews Museum of Maine Heritage in Union, Maine, where it sits over a display of Moxie memorabilia. Number 5. Nameless Abandoned Resort. The city of Cadiz is where the desert and savanna meet, in southern Mauritania's Gorgol region. It's home to a series of futuristic-looking domed structures connected by a series of vaulted tunnels. This is the Cadiz Regional Hospital. It was built in 1989 and seems to have inspired a similar-looking resort located a few miles outside the city. The property consists of a collection of domed red brick buildings that are connected by tunnels. Each building has 1 or 2 glassless windows with shutters, as well as a 3 to 4 inch thick skylight that lets natural light in. The structures stay cool inside all day long despite the harsh, dry heat that plagues the region. The resort reportedly closed in 2017, yet nobody seems to know what it was called, and information about it is pretty scarce. A family that lives across the street keeps watch over the property, according to Atlas Obscura, yet they don't know much about it, or at least that's what they keep saying. The mysterious deserted site is fenced off, but the family will show visitors how to get in exchange for a small tip. Number 4. Winchester Mystery House. Sarah Winchester was an incredibly wealthy widow who became convinced that she was cursed after her husband's death in 1881. Convinced that moving was the only way to rid herself of the curse, she moved from New Haven, Connecticut to San Jose, California, where she bought an unfurnished farmhouse. She hired workers to expand the house and told them to build day and night. Sarah didn't hire an architect and had no real plan. All she knew was that she never wanted construction to stop. Building continued for 38 years until her death in 1922. During that time, the house went from being a simple 8-room structure to a 7-story, 160-room mansion with 10,000 windows and 2,000 doors. One door leads directly to a 15-foot, 4.6 meters drop to a garden below. Another is situated 8 feet, 2.4 meters above a kitchen sink. Some staircases intersect with ceilings rather than the next floor. There are a series of secret passages as well. Behind one cabinet door, there's a hidden collection of 30 rooms. Some people believe that Sarah thought she would die if the house was ever finished, or that she created the confusing interior to mislead the spirits that she thought were following her. The house was declared worthless following her death due to its impractical layout, because it was unfinished and because it had been damaged in an earthquake. It was opened to visitors just months after Sarah died. The Winchester Mansion inspired Stephen King's Rose Red, a thrilling miniseries about a sprawling estate occupied by malevolent spirits. Have you ever taken a tour through this awesome and creepy mansion? Number 3. Ryuyong Hotel. A pyramid-shaped concrete skyscraper dots the desolate skyline in the North Korean capital of Pyongyang. Standing at 1,080 feet, 330 meters tall, the 105-story structure holds the Guinness record as the world's tallest unoccupied building. Construction began on the Ryuyong Hotel in 1987 with plans to fill it with 3,000 rooms. But North Korea fell into an economic crisis after the Soviet Union collapsed, and in 1992, building screeched to a halt. The windowless, partially furnished building fell into decay as it sat for over a decade with a rusting crane outside. During the late 90s, the European Chamber of Commerce in North Korea inspected the hotel and described it as irreparable. Elevator shafts appeared crooked, and the committee expressed concerns about the quality of the building material. As the Hermit Kingdom went out of its way to omit the eyesore from photos of the city's skyline, the Ryuyong Hotel earned itself an international reputation as the worst building in the world. The media nicknamed it the Hotel of Doom and the Phantom Hotel. Construction nevertheless resumed in 2008. North Korean officials announced that the building would be finished by 2012 and set an opening date for the following year. These plans were suspended in 2013. 5 years later, an LED display was added to the outside of the building, and of course, it's used for displaying propaganda. A hotel sign and a logo appeared in 2019. Nobody knows whether the Ryuyong Hotel will ever be finished, or if it'll open to guests. Rumors still speculate that the building is structurally unsound, and images as recent as 2012 show that the inside was still bare. There are even rumors that it's haunted, but no evidence of any lost souls has ever been found. Number 2. Kalyzen Bell Tower. In a move to modernize Russia during the 1930s, dictator Joseph Stalin ordered the construction of a dam on the upper Volga River in the city of Kalyzen. The project created the Uglish Reservoir, which flooded 2 15th and 16th century monasteries and several other buildings. Everything was completely covered in water except for the bell tower of the St. Nicholas Cathedral, which juts 244 feet out of the water. Built in 1796, it serves as the only reminder of the submerged historic village. The area around the belfry was filled in to create a small island, and the site became one of the main tourist destinations in the eastern Tver Oblast region. There's nothing remarkable inside the tower, but curious visitors often take ferries to the site to get a closer look at its exterior. And the site can be reached on foot when the reservoir freezes during the winter. The belfry functions as a lighthouse and is occasionally used for Orthodox Christian ceremonies. Number 1. Presidio Modelo. During the 1920s, Cuban dictator Gerardo Machado ordered the construction of a so-called model prison on the Isla de la Juventud, Isle of Youth. Located outside the island's capital of Nueva Gerona, the complex consists of 5 circular blocks with 4 of the buildings surrounding a structure in the middle. In what's known as a panopticon architectural style, prison cells were built in tiers around central observation points, enabling guards to keep a constant eye on the facility's inmates and requiring fewer guards altogether. The stations were darkened so that the prisoners couldn't tell if they were being watched. The Presidio Modelo was built to house 2,500 men, but it became widely overpopulated as Fidel Castro rose to power, and at one point it housed over 6,000 prisoners. The penitentiary was filled with garbage and had no running water, and the Cuban government provided inmates with very little in the way of food and other necessities. Castro himself and his brother Raúl spent 2 years at the Presidio Modelo following a failed attack on the Moncada military barracks in 1953. He and his co-conspirators were lucky enough to be housed in the prison's hospital wing, where the cells were considered large and luxurious compared to the other buildings. By foolishly putting all the rebels together, the dictator at the time, Fulgencio Batista, gave them a chance to continue their revolutionary training. They met daily for political lessons and secretly corresponded with supporters of the movement throughout the country. Presidio Modelo continued to operate after Castro became dictator in 1959. Many of the new ruler's political opponents were housed there. It was during this time that overcrowding and the harsh treatment of inmates became major problems. Riots broke out and prisoners went on hunger strikes, and the government closed the facility in 1966. Today, the site is a national monument and a museum. Its former administration building functions as a school and a research center. Number 10. Amazing garden ornaments. When a family in the United Kingdom decided to pack up and move out of their house, they had to get rid of a bunch of random objects they didn't feel like taking with them. Some of these objects ended up being worth a fortune. Lucky for them, a pair of garden statues, which the homeowners had just thought were Egyptian Sphinx garden gnomes, turned out to be actual Egyptian sphinxes from ancient Egypt. Can you imagine having priceless ancient artifacts under your roof for so long? Good thing they didn't just donate them to Goodwill. They knew the garden gnomes were worth something since they did look like antiques, but they were thinking maybe $300 or $500. When they took objects to the auction to sell, the experts that were there realized they were looking at the real deal, artifacts over 5,000 years old. The couple made over $200,000 on these garden gnomes, which weren't gnomes at all. Now for the big question, how did this ordinary couple come into possession of ancient Egyptian artifacts? The artifacts had been there already when they purchased the house almost 20 years ago. Nobody knows how they went from ancient Egypt to English garden gnomes, but the couple made some serious bank off them anyway. Number 9. Jurassic Sea Monster. The remains of a terrifying sea monster from the Jurassic period have been discovered in a very strange and unusual place. It was found by paleontologists in Poland who were looking through a cornfield. Yes, a seemingly ordinary cornfield held the skeletal remains of a creature so powerful it could have bitten the head off a Tyrannosaurus Rex. The creature is known as a plesiosaur, an ancient marine reptile and one of the biggest ocean predators that ever existed. It lived 150 million years before today, at a time when Poland was fully underwater. That's why its fossil was found in the cornfield near a small Polish village in the Holy Cross Mountains. Paleontologists also found bones from plesiosaurs, from prehistoric crocodile relatives, and from ancient turtles so big you'd never believe your eyes. But the plesiosaur was definitely the biggest, growing to be over 32 feet, 9.7 meters long, and weighing dozens of tons. According to researcher Daniel Tiborowski, the plesiosaur had a huge and powerful neck which helped it literally crush the bones of other prehistoric animals. Definitely glad this one is extinct. Number 8. North Carolina Shipwreck. There's a creepy abandoned shipwreck sinking beneath the sand on a North Carolina beach. It looks like an ancient fishing boat that's been stranded for a century. Yet the vessel has only been abandoned since 2020. It was originally a scallop boat called the Ocean Pursuit. But when it got stranded on the beach near Cape Hatteras National Seashore, the owner just kind of walked away and left it there. The shipwreck is over 72 feet, 22 meters long, a pretty massive vehicle. In just 1 year, almost all of it has been swallowed by the sand on the beach. The shipwreck site is now a popular tourist destination despite the National Park Service warning people to stay away from it. They say exploring the vessel can be dangerous, especially because of the shifting sand. The government is so worried about people injuring themselves on the ship that they're now spending almost $300,000 to remove it. The removal is expected to start around Halloween, so you better get down to the beach and take your photos while you still can. But remember, do so at your own risk. Number 7. Crusader Sword. Off the coast of Israel, an amateur diver looking for curiosities found something almost too amazing to believe. He found a relic that had been sitting on the seafloor since the year 1100. After 900 years of being submerged beneath the waves, he brought the shocking artifact back on dry land, what the experts claim is a sword once used by a legendary crusader. Being a good Samaritan, diver Shlomi Katzin handed the artifact over to the Israel Antiquities Authority. I'm not sure how much good it does, but handing the artifact over earned him a certificate of good citizenship. Maybe he'll get some free coffee if he waves his certificate around. Hey Karma, check out this nice guy. But in any case, once the archaeologists got a hold of the artifact, that was when things got interesting. It turns out the sword dates back to the days of the Crusaders. Specifically, it was probably the sword of a Crusader knight who lost it at the Mediterranean seaport of Caesarea. It is in remarkable condition, other than the barnacles and sea creatures that have covered it in the past 900 years. Nobody knows the identity of the knight, how they lost their sword in the water, or if it was ever used in battle. But it's still an amazing blast from the past. Finding actual weapons from the days of the Crusades is nearly impossible. Number 6. Antique artillery shells. In the state of New Jersey, a landscaper stumbled upon a pair of antique artillery shells in a rather unusual place. He was working to excavate somebody's lawn at Cape May when he and his crew made the bizarre discovery. There were 2 massive bombs hidden beneath the grass, each one bigger than a football. According to what the landscaper told local news, they looked like giant bullets. The police were alerted to this explosive situation, and they sent in their experts to clear the bombs out. In the end, the neighborhood had to be evacuated, but the explosives were taken care of. Military experts say the shells were from World War II. They'd likely been collected by the owner of the house, then at some point buried under his yard and forgotten. When the homeowner died recently in 2020, his house was sold and the landscapers came in to fix the place up. That was when they found the explosives. And while for now it seems the yard is safe, who knows what else the lunatic hid around his property. What would your reaction be if you purchased a home and found live artillery shells from World War II underneath the lawn? Let us know in the comments, and if you're liking the video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 5. Medieval Russian jewelry. Archaeologists from the Russian Academy of Sciences made a shocking discovery at the site of Old Ryazan, which was once a fortified capital used by the Rus. The Rus, as you can probably guess, were the original Russians. The fortress was sacked and destroyed by Batu Khan when he came rampaging through Russia with his Mongolian army in the 13th century. So what exactly did the archaeologists find? They uncovered a literal buried treasure. They found a cache filled with cool pendants, bracelets, rings, and pure silver ingots. What's really fascinating is that according to the researchers, the different pieces of jewelry were accumulated over an undetermined amount of time. What this means is that somebody had been collecting pieces of silver jewelry, perhaps stealing them from vanquished enemies, and then stashing it all in a box. Then, just before the Mongol invasion, the box of jewelry was buried beneath the foundations of the fort. It stayed there hidden underground for about 800 years until modern archaeologists dug it up in 2021. Number 4. The Buddha head in a tree. In Thailand, in the ancient capital of Ayutthaya, there's a mysterious Buddha head stuck inside the roots of a great tree. And while a lot of people are familiar with the famous head, not many know why it ended up in such a strange place. Ayutthaya is about 50 miles, 80 kilometers from the capital of Bangkok. The city was founded back in the year 1350, later turning into the second capital of the Kingdom of Siam. At the time, it was likely the largest city in the world with over 1 million inhabitants. It was a massive trading hub littered with beautiful temples and monuments. It was honestly one of the most impressive places a person could have visited up until the 1700s. That was when Siam was defeated by the Burmese kingdom and their great city was destroyed. Ayutthaya was left broken, plundered, and soon forgotten. It didn't get any attention again until the 20th century when the Thai government brought the ancient capital back to life as a tourist destination. But now back to the mysterious stone head. Some theories say it was broken off a statue during the attack by the Burmese, then eventually wrapped up into the roots of a banyan tree, where it has remained ever since. Others say a thief stole the head, hid it in the roots, and forgot to go back for it. Whatever the case, it seems to have been there for at least 300 years. Number 3. The Ohio Ghost Ship. At the bottom of an old, worn-out trail in the woods of Boone County, Ohio, there's a small creek. This creek is so small that you could barely fit a kayak in the water. And yet, at the bottom of this trail, there's a huge abandoned shipwreck, bigger than 4 school buses put against each other. The locals call it the Sachem, with its history going back to the year 1902. It was built 10 years before the Titanic by a guy named John Rogers Maxwell. Maxwell was a railroad tycoon who wanted to use the ship as a pleasure yacht. It was outfitted with all the luxuries of the day, then promptly stolen by the U.S. Navy during World War I. Well, not stolen, more like commandeered. It's like in a cop movie when the officer has to commandeer a vehicle to catch a bad guy. The Navy had to commandeer the boat to defeat the enemy. It was used by Thomas Edison in experiments for detecting submarines and torpedoes. It was turned into a fishing boat after the war, then commandeered yet again in World War II for patrolling the New York harbor. By the 1970s, it was sitting in a scrapyard. A guy from Boone County happened upon it, purchased the abandoned ship, brought it back to Ohio to use, and then never got around to it. He abandoned it in the creek, where it still sits today. Number 2. Mars Rock. NASA's Perseverance rover has been driving around on Mars ever since it landed in late February of last year. Normally, it doesn't see that much excitement. It finds rock, dust, and everything you expect to find on Mars. But recently it came across a very strange rock that scientists have been unable to identify. In fact, NASA scientists say they have no idea where the rock came from. The rock even looks different from other rocks found on the red planet. It's full of large pits, it's completely green, and it has a very smooth surface. The smoothness of the rock suggests that it spent a lot of time underwater, slowly being eroded. This is the only way a rock can get that smooth. The issue here is that there's no water on Mars, at least not that we've ever found. Plus, all the other rocks surrounding it look completely normal. The main theory right now is that the rock came from a different planet or a totally different part of space, yet it looks nothing like any meteorite that scientists have ever seen. It's a complete mystery, with NASA scientists having no good explanation for the strange rock. It's like finding a bright red stone on the beach that looks nothing like any other stone on Earth. It just makes no sense. Do you have any theories about this? Number 1. Uruguay plane crash. Back in 2015, 10 people were killed in Uruguay when their plane crashed into a lake. The plane was a twin-engine Beechcraft, and it plummeted right into Laguna del Sauce in the province of Maldonado. Navy Special Forces were sent to recover the unfortunate victims of the horrifying crash. Sadly, every single person on board was found dead. The plane was then left in the lake as nobody really knew what to do with it. We don't know if the plane is still sitting there in the lake today, but seeing as this was pretty much in the middle of nowhere, chances are it's still rusting away there in the swampy waters. Number 8. The Stoner and the Tiger. Back in 2019, a guy in Houston, Texas was looking to get high, and he didn't have a place of his own to go to. So what better place than someone else's garage? Breaking into the house, he probably got comfortable and prepared to light up and chill out. And it was then that he saw the tiger. Yes, inside this ordinary-looking garage was a 350-pound, 159-kilogram tiger. No doubt wondering who the heck the intruder was. Freaky, right? Not that we should feel too sorry for the stoner. Turns out the tiger was being kept in a cage that was too small for it. There was just a small food supply, and apparently the big cat had no water. It was obvious the tiger had been there for some time. All credit to the smoker who, instead of running for his life, called the authorities and told them all about it. From there, the animal went to a sanctuary and hopefully had a much better time. In a playful move, they christened it Tyson after the tiger in The Hangover. So what happened to the former owner of the tiger? We're not sure, but one thing we can tell you is that they weren't exactly out of line. Because you can legally buy a wild animal like a tiger and keep it at home in Texas. It's estimated that a couple thousand tigers are hanging out in the state. If it wasn't such a serious matter, it would sound like something out of a sitcom. "I'm just off to work, honey, and could you feed the tiger while I'm out?" As for the guy that made the discovery, maybe this unexpected encounter scared him off the grass for good. Or he visited the tiger at the sanctuary and became friends. Whatever transpired, this is one bizarre and unique story of abandonment. Number 7. Abandoned Mansion. This sounds like something out of a ghost story, but it's actually a true case of an abandoned property with a distinguished pedigree. A plumber was driving in North London in 2020 when he noticed a mansion that had clearly seen better days. As well as fixing people's leaky taps and such, the guy was also somewhat of an urban explorer. This was the perfect opportunity for him to indulge his passion for undiscovered spaces. The 8-bedroom house had been abandoned by the family, and it appears they left it in a hurry. They left all their stuff behind, which included photos, books, painting, canned goods, and other fascinating items that give some indication of what the place was like when occupied. It's believed the spooky mansion dates back to the 1930s. How do investigators know this? Because of the expiration dates found on cans of food inside. Yeah, probably don't want to taste test those. In terms of who owns the property now, it's speculated that the house was bought and then left to gather dust when the sheer scale of the task was realized. Ultimately, the mansion is thought to be in good condition, so maybe it'll be renovated at some point. As for what happened to the people in the photos and why they ever wanted to leave their possessions, nobody knows. Number 6. Buzluja Monument. This very unusual-looking structure on a mountain in Bulgaria may have a Bond movie villain HQ vibe. However, it was designed as a monument to the ruling Communist Party in Bulgaria. This grand vision was realized between 1971 and 1984, though Bulgarians only had a few years to witness the sight. Communism in the country reportedly came to an end in 1990, with the Soviet Union collapsing the following year. Say what you want about the ideology, but this huge and indeed abandoned building is awe-inspiring to behold. Epic mosaics were created from literally millions of pieces. Though once the administration went down, the monument fell into disrepair. The dome fell in, and it seemed as if the place might be lost forever. Efforts are underway to rescue the mosaics and preserve this important part of Bulgaria's history. Apparently, the project to restore the monument house has won a grant, so former glories can be captured once again. The monument has often been compared to a UFO, which is only fitting for a location that's somewhat out of this world. Number 5. Bannerman Castle. You've heard of the word stronghold, right? Well, this discovery out in New York's Hudson Highlands certainly lives up to that. Bannerman Island, as it became known, or Pullapel after a girl who was rescued from the freezing Hudson River, is home to the abandoned Bannerman Castle. Or to be more precise, what's left of it. It used to belong to a munitions giant, Francis Bannerman. He'd moved over to the USA from Scotland as a young child. The man made his fortune through scrap material he found by the water. The name became associated with weapons and objects from wars, though Bannerman himself reportedly didn't believe in conflict. How did he wind up constructing a Scottish-style castle on the island? The answer is, quite literally, explosive. Bannerman wasn't allowed to keep his large and potentially very dangerous collection inside city limits. So he needed to venture further afield, and this place fit the bill. He actually spotted it while out on his canoe in 1900. Also, it wasn't his only stronghold. Bannerman wanted to spend time at the picturesque location. His wife Helen grew plants, and from what we've read, it sounds like the island became an idyllic hideaway, albeit one with a bunch of weapons stored on it. Bannerman Castle was occupied until the 1950s. Bannerman himself passed away in 1918. A devastating fire happened there in 1969, claiming much of the structure. Restoration work was performed in 2020, according to reports. These days, the area is a tourist destination and also used to perform live theater. Would you like to visit this cool castle? Let us know in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 4. Bittman Coins. Some restoration projects can be challenging. You've got to think of the money that goes into it, right? Jeff Bittman found himself stumbling upon piles of classic coins whilst assisting with a house clearance back in 2007. He was in the borough of Windber, Pennsylvania, with relatives sorting through what was left at the abandoned property. The clearance was triggered by the death of the house's owner, though curiously it had been unoccupied for 2 decades. It was when Bittman observed a hole in a wall that inspiration struck. Bittman heard that money had apparently been tossed into the hole. We're not sure why, to be honest. We like to keep a hold of ours. Anyway, Bittman had a hunch there might be something juicy behind the wall, so he set about pulling it open. He was indeed correct, with approximately $200,000 worth of loot inside. A selection of the currency dated back to the late 18th century, making this a really special discovery. Think about it. All that cash stashed away behind the wallpaper for years, and no one really knew it existed. Bittman is a mainstay of the city of Johnstown, where he runs a store called Rare Collectibles. Who better to make such a historic and one-of-a-kind find? Number 3. Bouchardon Doorstop. What do you use to prop open your doors? One of those little plastic wedge-shaped things? Well, how about an early 18th century sculpture by a noted artist? It sounds crazy, but that's exactly what happened in 1998 when a British councillor was rummaging around looking for something else. The bust, created by Edem Bouchardon, depicts Sir John Gordon, who was a member of Parliament and laird at the time. A laird is a Scottish word for estate owner. How did it come to be used as a handy household doorstop? Who knows? Guess whoever owned the shed had a sense of style. That said, this was one valuable doorstop. As reported back in 2016, it's worth a staggering $1.9 million or 1.4 million pounds. From this less than glamorous setting, Bouchardon's bust went on to visit the Louvre in Paris and then the John Paul Getty Museum in Los Angeles. We reckon this might be the most expensive doorstop on the planet. Not that it's being used as a doorstop now, of course. Unless a world-class museum or art gallery needs something to use while they give the place a bit of air. Number 2. Russian Bunker. A must-see destination for fans of military hardware in Russia lies on the Kola Peninsula in the northwest. There's a visible cannon sticking out of the ground, and it's indicative of an abandoned underground bunker. The location is reportedly accessible to the public, though it's far from a tourist attraction. And what's even more bizarre is that the bunker appears to be in working order. But why was it abandoned in the first place? Looks like the whole deal happened because of the country's tangled political past. Stuff was left to rust and never returned to. It's a fascinating piece of history, but also a dangerous one. The bunker is referred to as the Ponoshevny Battery, and you can reportedly get in there by various access points. What's inside? There's weapon storage and a bunch of leftover shells. In 2020, the bunker and its cannon were photographed and posted online. How many members of the public have been for a look-see? Who can say? But it's a great opportunity to get a look at part of Russia's military past up close. But you have to be super careful, bearing in mind the bunker has apparently been abandoned without much thought for those who might stumble across it. Number 1. Ross Island. Ross Island, situated in the Bay of Bengal, India, gets its name from marine surveyor Sir Daniel Ross. This collection of overgrown buildings may not look like much now, but back in the 18th century, it was a busy hub for British colonialists. In fact, the place was deemed so fancy that they called it the Paris of the East. The British moved and made themselves at home. They soon realized, however, that this wasn't the most hospitable of environments. A hospital and sanatorium was built on the island. However, in 1796, the British abandoned the island, primarily because of the high mortality rate and frequent outbreaks of disease. But they came back midway through the 19th century. Why? For an epic project. This time they had some grand plans. To begin with, the island was going to host a penal colony. The poor convicts were tasked with hacking through the undergrowth and making way for many of the structures we see today. And a sizable proportion of them were worked so roughly they didn't get to see the end result. British authorities wanted to make Ross Island into a combined convict settlement and administrative base. The place may have hosted prisoners, but it also had features such as a tennis court and a pool for those not behind bars. Sounds like a strange combination, right? This time the visitation was more permanent. Over the course of its history, Ross Island accommodated approximately 81,000 prisoners, 1,000 of which were imprisoned for their political convictions. The island remained a prison right up until World War II, in fact. Then an earthquake resulted in the Brits leaving and the Japanese taking over. Bad news for the convicts, right? Actually, no. The Japanese reportedly let them go. The admin center fared less well and was largely demolished. The Imperial Army made their mark on the place by adding bunkers to the architectural landscape. When the war ended, the Brits returned yet again, though not for long. Between 1945 and 1979, the island was truly abandoned, before becoming the property of the Indian government. Thanks for watching. Are there any incredible abandoned discoveries you think we left off the list? Let us know in the comments down below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more amazing videos right here on American Eye.